Morning, everyone. So the Rwanda, Parliament's back in session. Easter's over, and instead of it's telling me the red button says "Go live" on it, mate. No, it doesn't. I don't get that button. But so the Rwanda bill's back in session. Yesterday, the House of Commons voted on the second round of House of Lords amendments. They voted them all down. I'll even point out, actually, do you know which amendment they voted down by the largest, with the largest number, by the largest margin? You know that? The one that protects the victims of slavery. Of all the amendments that the Tories voted them all down yesterday, but the biggest margin of defeat for any amendment was the amendment which literally protects the victims of modern slavery. So you've got these Tories who are going around wrapping themselves in the Union flag, going, "Oh, the British Empire is marvelous. We made slavery illegal, you know." Yeah, we made slavery illegal. It wasn't all bad. And yet they've passed several bits of legislation in the last. I can't see anything coming up on my screen, so I hope this is going live. The several bits of legislation that have gone through Parliament in the last few years that have increased the chances of slavery occurring in this country, and you've got and other ones as well that have reduced the chances of detection, so actually made it harder for authorities to be able to detect it. And sort of this is another one. I really am very worried by the fact I can't see anything going live here. Can someone just confirm in the chat that it is going live? Thank you. I don't know what's going on my end then. So, yeah, the Tories have yesterday voted to not protect victims of modern slavery by the largest margin. That was the amendment they hated the most, protecting victims of slavery. Anyway, never mind. The point is that what happens now is it'll go back to the House of Lords. The House of Lords, I mean, they sort of effectively have two choices, but realistically, they don't have any choice. The two choices in theory they have is they can first of all go, look, okay, so they've already amended it once, and the Conservatives didn't like that. They sunk all those amendments. They went, okay, you don't like those amendments. Right, okay. But there's still a problem with the bill, so we'll try something else. So what the Lords are trying to do is explain to the House of Commons, your bill is illegal. You cannot do this. It is hideously illegal. You're going to destroy our international reputation here. So they amended it a second time, different amendments. They didn't use the same amendments, different amendments. And the Conservatives yesterday voted those down, to which the House of Lords are going, look, okay, we're clearly not getting through to you here. So they're going to have another third go later. If Rishi Sunak wants to push it later this week, the belief is really quickly, like the belief is this goes to the House of Lords again, and like Wednesday or something. I think maybe even today. I haven't actually checked. Should I check the House of Lords schedule for today? House of Lords business for today. But at some point this week, let's have a look at the order paper for today. At some point this week, the Rwanda bill goes back to the Lords, and the Lords will probably try and amend the worst of it again. And it'll go back to the Commons, and then the Commons will reject that as well. Now, so two things they can do. So the Lords can just try one more time to amend it. If it doesn't work, go, do you know what? We've tried to explain it to you. We've got the crayons out and everything. You weren't listening. On your head be it, son. And it passes into law. That is almost certainly what happens. That is almost certainly what happens. There is a slight possibility that the Lords decides, no, we can't stand for this because it actually is really damaging to our constitution. This isn't about, unelected chamber blocking the elected chamber. This is illegal, right? And you're trying to stop the courts. Because what is there to stop? What are our checks and balances against a corrupt rogue executive trying to break the law. What's our check against the government breaking the law? The court system. But what if the government bypasses the courts? What's the check against that? It's supposed to be the legislature. But in a parliamentary democracy like ours is like just all we have is the parliamentary aspect of it. The executive is the leader of the legislature because the executive is formed by the power within the elected chamber, the House of Commons. So it's the same party. The government, the balance of power in the House of Commons is in line with the government. They're always in line, even if they don't have majority public approval. So your only check against that in the legislature is the House of Lords, but the House of Lords is unelected, so they can't be blocking the elected members, right? So we don't have a check. So what check have we got for a government that wants to break the law? If the House of Lords does not stand firm this week, and we don't think it will because it's not really supposed to, then we don't have any checks at all. I'm going to be doing a video about this on my own channel later on. And this, to me, is going to make the case stronger for Keir Starmer's idea of replacing it. Because remember, like a lot of people looked at Keir Starmer because he didn't talk a lot about it, right? It's not because a lot of people in Labour don't really like it. So it's his personal project, this getting rid of the House of Lords, replacing it. So a lot of people think replacing the House of Lords with an elected assembly, and all they see is getting rid of unelected lords and replacing them with elected members of a different, you won't call it the House of Lords, but a different chamber. But that's not the big idea behind Starmer's plans. It's not, because that's what people see. They just see replacing them with elected ones. And if they're elected, they could block things like this. It's like, yeah, but where people have a problem is they could also block good legislation. You end up with party politicking between two different bodies, just like you get in the United States. Sometimes like you get in France. The same sort of thing can happen in France. France have a few other extra little checks against it, which are working in Macron's favor at the moment. But we don't want that in this country. We don't want to have like an elected upper house that then just blocks everything the House of Commons does for party politics, because you've got a different party in charge of each one. So what can you do? Well, Starmer's idea isn't for that anyway. Starmer's idea is that, first of all, it represents the regions instead of all living in London or France. Most lords live in London or France. But the idea is that it acts as a defense against the Constitution. So my thought would be you reform it so, first of all, when legislation passes from the Commons to the upper chamber, whatever it ends up being called, that upper chamber gets 3 chances to revise it, just like the Lords is doing now. 3 chances to revise it. If on that 3rd time the Commons goes, no, we don't like this, fine, it passes. They don't stop it, right? But set that down. Instead of making that like an unofficial convention, make it part of the process. So it's constitutionally set. That is an automatic process. So then what do you do about something like the Rwanda bill, where the problem is not just that it's immoral? I mean, morality is subjective. There are people who think it is moral, and there are people who think it's immoral. So take the morality out of it. The big issue with the Rwanda bill is it allows the government to break the law without any checks and balances. So what do you do about something like that? Starmer's idea is that the assembly, this upper chamber, can refer things like that, anything that's unconstitutional, to the Supreme Court. So the idea, I don't know that this is specifically what it's intended, but this has been my idea. The idea would be something like the Rwanda bill comes to this upper chamber, right? So they can try and revise it 3 times. If that fails, then what they can do is say, they can refer, if they think that it's unconstitutional, they can refer it to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court says, yes, this would have the effect of allowing the government to breach our domestic and international laws, then that upper chamber would then have the power to block it, because there'd be 2 bodies, parts of the government, blocking it: the Supreme Court and the upper chamber, who will be elected. And that way you'd be able to stop stuff like this. Now, it comes too late because we haven't got the system in place, but that's what I'd be looking at. Sarah's saying PR for the House of Lords. I think any new legislative body that is set up from now or reformed from now on should certainly use some form of PR. Yes, it should be representative, you know, and certainly if Labour do that, surely it will be, because Labour's official position now, remember, is that first past the post is bad for politics. That is their formal position. So Labour cannot, without breaking their own formal position, they cannot actually reform any legislative body or create a new one and use first past the post, because their own formal position is that first past the post is really bad. Which is why when people talk about the fact, oh, Labour will never go for electoral reform, it's like, don't be too sure, because remember, the way there is resistance to it, I'll not get you wrong, but that same resistance did not want that statement coming out last year that first past the post is, I can't remember the exact words now, I'd have to look it up, but it's creating mistrust in politics, creating alienation between politics and the public. That was the gist of what it was saying. So those who in Labour are opposed to changing first past the post did not want that statement being made, and it has been made, which means that there's more support for electoral reform than against, purely because that statement was allowed to come out. And let us not forget, there was the motion the year before at the conference overwhelmingly was in favour of not just the electoral reform, specifically proportional representation. So the party's position is pro-PR. Interestingly as well, for those who think where the objections come from the leadership, the objections are not from the leadership. There is a shadow minister. There is no equivalent ministerial position. The Tories don't have this, but there is a shadow ministerial position for basically for democracy. Like there's like when Labour in power, there's going to be a minister for democracy, whose job it's going to be to carry out reforms designed to increase, satisfaction, for want of a better word, with the thing. And she is explicitly pro-PR. So Starmer has chosen to make, I mean, it's a junior ministerial position. It won't be a cabinet member, but has nonetheless chosen to make someone who's explicitly pro-PR in charge of this. So yeah, it's there for the taking. But anyway, I'm getting off there. Alex saying, I made a mock upper chamber based on the Hunt regions and the 2019 elections. Right-wing parties got 99 of the 200 seats. Oh, you'd only have 200 seats? I would have more. I would have many more than 200 seats. The thing is, as well, a more representative system pretty much requires that you have more members. You actually need more members. I mean, the House of Lords is really bloated now. I'm not suggesting a proportional House of Lords would have more members than it does now, but it would have more than 200. You'd need more than 200. Otherwise, I really don't see how could you, like, put it this way: we have 650 members of the House of Commons represent, and they do represent the regions. Well, whether they represent is another matter, but they are based around the country in proportion to the population density, right? So yes, you have got a load of MPs in the south of England. That's because you've got a load of people there. So they are mapped to where people are living, and that's 650. So if you only had 200, you'd have to have people in the sort of like the made-up House of Lords. You'd have to have each individual members representing like 3 constituencies, more than 3 constituencies, really. No, you'd need more. And I don't mind having more as well. Like, there's no issue. I would increase the size of the House of Commons to accommodate this, because there's a lot of people will come up with crap like, oh, but in America they've only got like 200 members in Capitol Hill. It's like, yeah, but they've got massive amounts of devolved power making as well. Each individual state has its own legislative body, which passes laws and sets taxes and all sorts of things that local councils don't in this country. In fact, some states in America, states in some ways, I should say, in some ways have more powers than even the Scottish Parliament. And the Scottish Parliament is the most powerful devolved body in the UK. Steve saying, sadly, our democracy is limited by capacity of an old building. Yeah, they should. I keep saying they should move that. It's utterly ridiculous. It is an old building. Keep it as a museum. Use it for things. Keep it as a museum. Open it up to the public. Whatever. Because what's really mental about the House of the Palace of Westminster, the House of Parliament, is they're carrying out upgrades on it because they have to obviously make it. It is an ancient building, so there's constantly work having to be done to make sure the bloody thing don't fall down. And it's costing billions, as you'd expect. But it's costing even more billions because to do the work, because basically what should have happened is they should have moved somewhere else, at least temporarily while the work was carried out. In order to carry out that work, whilst the Palace of Westminster is still doing its day job, is basically, I think it's nearly doubling the budget. So it's costing billions more to do this work just because MPs refuse to move out for a bit. So they should have saved all that money. In fact, for the extra cost of I think I'm right in saying this, but it's a while since I've seen the figure. I think I'm right in saying for the extra cost of managing these repairs, because MPs are in there, they could have built a modern purpose-built parliament in Doncaster, of course. Graham thinks Liverpool, I think Doncaster. But somewhere else, should we say, outside of London, and it would be fit for purpose. But anyway, Rishi has one job to secure hundreds of billions for emphasis going forward. Yes, indeed. I still am amazed. See, Rishi Sunak's motivation is clear to me. It wasn't at first. I didn't know at first whether his interest in politics was, interest in becoming prime minister. Was it just to become the first non-white prime minister? Because that's page in the history books, isn't it? No matter how bad he is, that's a guaranteed page in the history books, isn't it? And I wasn't sure if it was vanity like that, or was it just financial. It's quite clear it's financial. He doesn't make a lot of the fact is that is this non-white prime minister. He doesn't actually make a big deal of it. So he is just interested in money, purely interested in money. You say no one knows where Doncaster is. I'll tell you where Doncaster is. It's right in the middle of our rail network. There is a reason why when our railways were nationalised, the main depot for British Rail was at Doncaster. My dad worked there. That was their main depot because it was central to the whole network. Everything passes through Doncaster. All roads used to lead to Rome. Now they lead to Doncaster. That's where Doncaster is, the intersection of everything. So Doncaster is where you change trains for hulls. It's where you change trains for everything. You say Doncaster isn't real, like Narnia. No, it's very real. Admittedly, I don't know my way around it these days because it's changed a lot since I lived there. It's a city now, at last. But anyway, never mind that. They say I visited the Scottish Parliament over the road from the historical Palace of Holyrood. I haven't actually visited it, in all honesty. The only time I'll tell you what, I've been to Scotland 3 times. One was I didn't even get out of the van. It was actually on a trip with my dad. We didn't even get out of the van, or I didn't. It was just a delivery. The other 2 times were both for the Edinburgh Fringe. So I haven't actually really been out and about anywhere in Scotland, if I'm completely honest. Still think News need to pick up Sunak snubbing Muslims by not attending his own Eid party. I mean, is it a snub or just I don't know, because he doesn't, he doesn't attend other things either, to be fair. And he's not Muslim and he's not Christian. He's Hindu. As long as the government has representation there, I think things like this are fine. Johnny Copperhead, £5 super chat. Thank you. It says, ironic that we have an Indian in charge of a government of cowboys. Yeah, different Indian, but yes, very good. And he's not Indian. I tend to balk at these things. I know you mean, you're just meaning because his parents were. But I always caution, do remember there are people out there who are claiming that Rishi Sunak is not British just because he's not white. So I always little caution about little jokes like that. I know it's funny and we don't mean it like that. But there are racists out there, far right racists, who will, you know, I'm not going to name the names, but there's some people on social media will regularly post up pictures, and they'll just post up a picture of Rishi Sunak, Hamza Yusuf. Now they'll do Vaughan Gething as well, and Sadiq Khan, and they will just post up their pictures, and then they'll just put absolute state of this country. And you know what they're trying to say. You know what they're saying. So I was like, balk at little things like that as well. John the Journey says, can you do a video and explain how first past the post works and why it misrepresents the electorate, and how PR would work and effect it would have with inevitable coalitions? In theory, I could. I think something like that would probably be better when there's a real move to create a public debate, because I cannot generate a public debate. Even the Labour Party cannot generate a public debate on something, and they can get to way more people than I do. They just choose often not to. So if I was to do that now, all it would do was be watched by people who are already of that view, who already understand the issues or most of the issues. However, once the election is, what I'm going to say is, when the election is over, there's a lot of like things, even within Labour, but certainly in non-partisan groups as well, that people want to put on the agenda. Now, everyone understands that at the moment, the focus is on the election, general election, getting rid of the Tories, right? From Labour's point of view, it's getting them into power. But from everyone else's point of view, they're not particularly bothered about Labour in power. They just want the Tories out of power. So everyone's got their heads down. Everyone's focused on that. Once that is done and out of the way, there is going to be an immediate shift to put in certain things on the agenda, both inside and outside the Labour Party. And one of them is going to be our electoral system. One of the main issues, and it's a really important issue, in fact, it's the biggest issue for me, and it is for a lot of other people as well, is great, we've got rid of the Tories. We've now got a more sensible government. Not everyone's fully aligned with Labour, but they'll agree it's a more sensible government, right? We cannot just go, oh, that's it, now we've solved the problem. We haven't solved the problem. We've deferred the problem. So people will now be very motivated to go, we now need to solve the problem of how we stop this ever happening again. Because there's going to be a whole charge sheet against the Conservatives, particularly in this last Parliament. And someone just had a good idea. Pinonate to say, fine, as someone just mentioned, it might have been Graham originally. Is that suggesting the House of Parliament becomes a home for the homeless? Yeah, fine, do that, whatever. But don't use it as a parliament. It's not fit for a parliament. It's not a modern parliament. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing, in fact. I mean, it looks very nice, don't get me wrong, but it's not practical. And I am all about function over form. Keep saying that to my partner. Whenever she says, oh, do you think this looks nice? Does it work? Like, for example, we now have in the kitchen a microwave, a kettle, and a toaster, and they all match, right? They're all shit. They don't work properly. They're crap. Oh, but they all match and they fit the decor. Brilliant. Nice one. But there we go. So it should be practical. If Blair had brought in PR, we would not have faced the disaster of the last 14 years and never left the EU. Exactly. Absolutely as big as, there were multiple mistakes and people always go, oh, but what about this? What about that? Yeah. PR was the biggest of all. Huge mistake. You're quite right. A lot of what has happened could not have happened if we'd have introduced that. Now, yes, he'd have needed to introduce it. We'd have needed a decent system. But then part of the promise was to have a review anyway, to work out the best system. And he wouldn't have needed to use people's assemblies for it. He had the authority to just introduce. It was in the manifesto. He had the authority to just go ahead with whatever he liked. So all he had to do was make sure, careful, she may be watching. She won't be watching, but it's fine. I'll tell her this. I don't keep secrets from my partner. When she does something bloody stupid, I'll say so. But yeah, it's I forgot what I was saying now. Yeah, if we'd have had PR in, no austerity, couldn't have happened. Certainly no Brexit, couldn't have happened. And none of the shit that Brexit has enabled in the last few years couldn't have happened. Wouldn't have happened. What would be happening right now is, we'd have now gotten used to coalition governments. We'd have gone through that. We'd have had our wrangles, and then we'd have now settled into a situation where if you want power, you're going to have to work with others, and that would be it. And we might have the Conservatives in government at this point. It may well be that Labour would have gotten too big for its boots and taken support from the Lib Dems and Greens for granted, and they may have gone, no, we're going to work with the Conservatives for a bit while you go away and think about what you've done. So we may be in that position, but the Conservatives would not have been able to push half the shit they've been pushing, because they would never get away with it, because their coalition partners would go, no, because this would be really bad for our own vote. But there it is. What did Parliament do during COVID? I've forgotten. Well, not a lot. Not a lot, in all honesty. There were some things. They did sort of work against some of the, like, for example, Boris Johnson tried to starve kids in summer in 2020. They did at least stop that. They were in charge. They were related to the parties. Parliament had no idea the parties were going on. Some individual MPs broke the law. We know that. But none of the, they weren't actually aware of what was going on with the parties at the time. That was purely Downing Street. That was entirely contained within Downing Street. Well, I suppose technically Chequers as well, but should we say senior members of the government and officials mostly? Say Conservative Lib Dem coalition really gave coalitions a bad name. The problem with it ultimately is it basically did exactly what the Conservatives wanted to do. The Liberal Democrats didn't. Obviously they were the junior partner. They couldn't like block everything. That would be ridiculous. Or actually they could have done. They just didn't. It was really, ultimately Nick Clegg, I think, was vain. I think, and you understand this, like, okay, the Lib Dems, because they're a centrist party, inevitably some in the Lib Dems are centre left, some are centre right, so Nick Clegg was basically like a moderate Tory, or a moderate conservative, maybe Tory is the wrong word, a moderate conservative who was just more liberal than most conservatives and therefore felt more at home in the Liberal Democrats than the Conservative Party. So that's how I saw Nick Clegg. But there it is. You say Mr. Rashford stopped it, Phil. Rashford was very useful in providing public support, definitely, but it required MPs to do it. There were Tory MPs who were. My own Tory MP actually fought against it. Because when I was writing to her, she did actually say, "Yeah, this is wrong. We're working on it." Marcus Rashford was very useful in raising attention, certainly. Thoughts on the sleeping orange blob in court? So yeah, for those who don't know, so Donald Trump is now in a criminal trial. The trial has started, the court case has begun, and he has to turn up to it. It's not like a civil case where he can just send his lawyers. He has to attend in person. And on the first day, he fell asleep in court. And it's quite funny because he keeps going on about sleepy Joe Biden. Well, who was asleep at his own criminal trial then? Who fell asleep at his own criminal trial? Things like that. I don't know whether it is, being widely reported in America. It absolutely should be. Trump gets in, we are doing. We are. There is good reason to suppose he shouldn't. But obviously, what I always say is there's good reason to suppose that the orange one should not end up back in the White House. It should end up in the big house, really, as the Americans call it. But the consequences of a winning are so severe that it doesn't bear thinking about. However, what I would say, just to end on a cheerier note, is think about the converse. At the moment, there's huge problems with the Republican Party in general. They are, for example, blocking a lot of support for Ukraine, which is why Europe, like Macron keeps saying this, Europe really needs to sort itself out. We need to work on the basis that America is not going to be there for us. And if it is, brilliant, bonus. And if it's not, we need to sort our own shit out. But Biden isn't just pushing to win the presidency. He's also pushing for more power in Congress. And he's using Roe versus Wade for that. Now, here's the thing. If the Democrats can take charge of Capitol Hill properly as well as have the White House, not only can they deal with Roe versus Wade once and for all, but it allows them to do lots of other things as well, including supporting Ukraine. Unfortunately, we have to wait like a year nearly a year for that to take place. But you know, there are positives as well. There are things you could that may turn out well out of this. But there we go. But we'll have to call it there. We'll run out of time, I'm afraid. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great day. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, of course. And until next time, I'll see you later.